Three, two, one.
All right, here we are. Episode 1 of Growth and Development. On this show, we focus on everyone's growth and development. It's literally in the name. So, like, comment, subscribe, and join us as we dive deep into some intense conversations. Our first topic is parenting. My wife and I, we have 4 amazing children, 2 boys and 2 girls. And we are literally working around the clock. And to be honest with you, we're learning on the job and sometimes we get it wrong, but there is no such thing as a perfect parent. And our parenting approaches change as our children continue to get older. There are issues that we can't foresee and we can't prepare for. And there are some issues that are just out of our hands. One of the things that I want to touch on is a national issue here in America. As a society, we deal with single parent households. And if you are a mother or a father that has grown up in a single parent household, then you are somewhat at a disadvantage. The reason being is that you don't have your mother or you don't have your father to consult with about certain issues that present themselves and how they handled it when you were a child. So if you did grow up in a household with both your mother and father, you're at an advantage and you have someone that you can talk to, a soundboard that you can bounce ideas off of, and you can bring your issues to them and say, hey, I'm going through X, Y, and Z with my child. What did you do when I did something like this? Or what would you do if I did something like this? And you have a voice to tell you audibly what to do. You might not listen to them. You might not take that approach. But if not anything else, you know what not to do. And for us parents that grew up in a single parent household, we're learning as we go. And there's no set of instructions that come with our children. So I want you guys to know, and I want you guys to be encouraged to know that you aren't alone. Now, numbers are getting better. Statistically, we as a society here in America, it's nothing like the 90s, where in the 90s, I believe it was something like every 68 females out of 1,000 females are single parents or they're teenage parents. And if you had a child as a teenager, then that is a different challenge altogether because you are a child who is having a child. And if you didn't know, for men, their brains, our brains, aren't fully developed until we're 25 years old. Women, you develop a lot faster than us, you mature a lot faster than us, and your brains are fully developed at 21. So if you're having a child before those ages, then you're practically a kid having a kid. But I want to open up your perspective to a larger world perspective and think about how in Western culture, we have this age group called teenagers. That doesn't necessarily exist in the rest of the world. When you are anywhere else, you go from being a child to being an adult. There are prearranged marriages and people are getting married in between the ages of 13 and 16. Women are getting pregnant in between those ages, and young men and maybe some women, but young men are going and they're taking over their family's farms. They're taking over their fabric business. They're taking over at whatever company their father has or their parents have. And that is a tough thing to understand, where here in America, you go from being an infant to being a toddler to being an adolescent to preteen to teenager to young adult, and now you're finally an adult. But in our basic biology, our basic makeup, you see it in females that, and like I said, I have 2 daughters, so this is something that I am conscious of and I have to be super duper aware of. When a female ends up having their time of the month, their body is now able to produce life. So our basic genetic makeups show you that there is no such thing as a teenager, that you go from child into adulthood. So I find it a little difficult to understand that completely, only because the brain tells us that you don't have the best skill sets and you're not all the way developed to make the best decisions. Your judgment is a little off. You haven't developed all the way in order for you to make a sound decision. Now, here in America, very different. 18 and up, you're no longer considered a minor. So with that being said, my mother, she had me at 15 years old, and that was very difficult. And then my mother had my younger brother at 20 years old. So she was a young mom of 2 boys. And as we know, it is difficult for a woman to raise a boy into a man. But what nobody talks about is it isn't any less difficult for a man to raise a boy into a man, especially when we have young men who are teenagers or young adults or officially an adult. They're still trying to figure out what it is to be a man and what that looks like. So how can they show a young boy how to be a man when they're still trying to figure it out? But when you make the decision to have a child, it is now your responsibility to figure it out. So there's no excuse. It doesn't, at some point, it boils down to you having that responsibility that this human life form is depending on you and your decision making, the thoughts that you have, the habits that you have, everything that you do now has a human life attached to it, just to put it simply. So with that being said, no matter if your brain hasn't fully developed, no matter if you have grown up in a single parent household, there isn't any good reason for you not to be there for your child. So if you have a child out there and you are not involved in their lives, just know that you are now affecting that child's development. You are affecting their future. You're affecting their adulthood. And when they have a child, it just continues. Generational, I don't want to call it a generational curse, but these challenges are now put on to their child and so on and so forth. And for me, co-parenting is very important. It takes a village. I know that we've gone away from this mentality and we are now living in a society where it's all about me and self-centeredness and selfishness and self-care is important, but don't mistake that for not taking care of those who are depending on you. We learn that even when you take flights, when you're on the airplane and they say to put the mask on first in order for you to what? Help someone else. Not just put the mask on and help yourself and let everybody else fall by the wayside. It's helping yourself so that you can be of service for other people. For me, My mother and father, they separated when I was 7 years old. My father moved down to North Carolina. We grew up in the tri-state area, and I visited my father in North Carolina every summer for 7 summers straight until I was 14 years old. Started working at 15, so I stopped visiting. That's a different story. Once you start working and feeling like you got to provide, then your time is limited. But what I realized as I was talking to some of my peers is they never got to have those conversations. Some of my peers that grew up without their fathers, they didn't get to have those conversations about sex, about racism, about what to do when a police officer pulls you over. Even something as less traumatic but of grave importance, something as simple as doing a job interview. I remember being on the phone with my father and him giving me a gem that I still use today. That is, when your employer asks you, what is one of your strengths and one of your weaknesses? And my father told me to spin the weakness so that it's presented as a strength. What he meant by that is, if they ask you what is one of your weaknesses, tell them, sometimes I can be a perfectionist to a fault. Now that sounds bad, but it sounds great, because for the employer, they want you to strive to meeting their goals in production and sales and getting what needs to get done. So I had that conversation and I use it today as an adult. Some of my peers, they didn't get that conversation with their father. So unfortunately, they're at a disadvantage and they're learning as they go. And sometimes they never develop those skills. I was given those tools to put on my tool belt so that I can use it in my later years. And that's when I learned the importance of co-parenting. So even if you and your child's mother or you and your child's father have separated, continue to co-parent. Continue to keep that open line of communication, even if you need a mediator. For years, people unfortunately use the child to get back at the other parent. And I know you heard it before, but it literally doesn't affect nobody but the child and their development. It affects their self-esteem. It creates doubts. It creates insecurities. It creates trauma. And now when they are of a certain age and they get involved with someone, again, once they're sexually active and a child comes about from this activity, they're not going to know how to co-parent. They're not going to know how to be a father. They're not going to have any examples. They're not going to have someone to consult with. So mothers and fathers out there, please, please, please know that both parents are completely necessary. And what I love that I see today in today's generation, which I didn't see as much when I was a kid, are all of these commercials that are on TV that you see fathers changing diapers. You wouldn't see that in the 90s or the early 2000s. Or you see fathers with their shirts off and an infant and they're doing skin to skin contact. I love that. And I love the fact that I'm seeing men of color in these commercials with their children. Fathers are so important in a child's development. We are called as men, in most belief systems, especially my belief system, I believe in Christ. I'm a Christian. I identify as a Christian. And what the Bible teaches me is that as a man, I'm called to be the head of my family. That does not mean that I'm a dictator. That doesn't mean that I'm a male chauvinist. That doesn't mean that I don't believe a woman's voice shouldn't be heard. I believe that we are partners. I believe that a woman is to help the man, and the man is to give up his life for his wife. So when you're called to be the head of a family, there's a lot of responsibility that falls on you. And for my single mothers who are parenting by themselves, my wife will be on the show, and she will be able to speak to a woman's perspective and her approach to motherhood and how she sees things. So I can't speak from that perspective. I can only speak from where I know what I have experience in, and that's being a father. And with my children, man, I take the time to listen to them, and I pray a lot. I'm patient, and I'm also a disciplinarian, but not in the sense that it once was. I did not like the time frame. Now I'm dating myself. This is a little bit before my time, where teachers had the ability to hit your child with a ruler, or parents. Now this was of my time. Parents hitting their child and beating their child. I'm glad that we moved away from that time frame, but I think that us as parents, we have to maintain this very important word in our household. And I'm going to say it with capital letters and several thousand exclamation points. No. The word of the day is no. Keep that word and stand strong on it, because we as individuals in our social groups, we're always saying, I don't want a yes man beside me, and I ain't nobody's yes man, or things of that nature. But are you a yes man to your child? Are you always saying yes when your child wants a snack? Snacks are good sometimes, but are they constantly snacking? Are you always saying yes when they want to watch something? Are there no boundaries? Are you giving them the cell phone and allowing them to just do whatever they want, and their face is constantly in a screen? Are they always on the video games? Is there no structure? At a certain point, you have to say no. That is our job. Why? How is that our job? Because society is eventually going to tell them no. And when they're told no, if they're always throwing temper tantrums and they don't know how to accept someone saying no, then they're in a world of problems. They're going to be in a world of problems, because they're going to hear no from their employer. They're going to hear no from their teachers. They're going to hear no from their professors. They might hear no from their spouse. And we have way too many people that don't know how to accept the word no. So I am a disciplinarian in that sense. I can be lenient at times. At other times, I am very strict. And that's a struggle for me, because as my son is getting older and he's in his teenage years, our oldest son, he's 16 years old, and he's getting invited to more and more social gatherings. And I think back to when I was 16 years old, and that's my reference point. So sometimes I get it wrong, and sometimes I'm a little off. But when I was 16 years old, we were wild, and we were living a colorful lifestyle, if you will. We were living it up. So with that being said, when I hear that my son's getting invited to a bonfire, and my wife asks me, what do I think? I'm like, absolutely not. Because when I think of bonfire, I'm thinking maybe a big field, big fire, lots of drinking, underage drinking, and that is not a place for my son to be. I have to protect him. It's my responsibility to guide him. It's my responsibility to make sure that he's making the wisest decisions. And if he can't make the wisest decision, it's my responsibility to make that decision for him. That's my job. It's my duty. Well, it turns out that this bonfire I was absolutely wrong about, because when I finally decided to let him go, which I did give him a time restriction. Now let me rewind and say I was asked if he could go to this bonfire in the morning. I immediately said no. And throughout the day, there was this tension in the house, and I might have been looked at as being mean or always saying no. And as the day grew on and it got a little later, I was like, so the bonfire was supposed to start at 8 p.m. So we got to like 6 p.m. and I asked my son, do you have the address to the bonfire? And he sent me the address. I typed it into the GPS. It was only 5 minutes from the house. So I'm like, okay, you can go, but I will be picking you up at 11 p.m. You're not staying out past midnight. That's not happening. So he's excited and ecstatic to go. When I get to the house and I drop him off at this bonfire, it turns out his friend just had a fire pit and it was in their driveway. I'm like, okay. And he was one of the first young people to show up, one of the first children to show up. And when I went there at 11:04, gave him 4 extra minutes, I guess. When I got there, he comes out of the house. Nobody's outside. He comes out of the house and he's telling me about his experience. And he's like, yeah, we made s'mores and we were watching the movie. And I'm like, my first thought is you guys are lame, but I'm glad that you guys were safe and there wasn't underage drinking. One of the first things that came to mind is there going to be parents present? My wife and I, we like to know the child and we like to know the child's parents. He told me that the parents were going to be there, but I want to meet the parents. Why do I want to meet the parents? Is because not everybody makes the best decisions, and their parents could be there, but their parents could also allow them to drink in their household. And if I don't allow my son or any of my children to drink, then my child has no business being there. And what I also want you guys to remember is your children are building their reputation. So just like your image matters, their image matters. And it also a reflection of you. So I keep all of that in mind as I parent. And as my child leaves the household, I make sure to remind him that you are out there representing me and your mother. So I was glad that I was wrong about the bonfire, aka a fire pit, but neither here nor there. That's what I'm talking about when I say that there are challenges that you can't foresee as your child continues to grow older. Another situation or an experience that I had with the oldest is he was invited to this birthday party that they did at a golf place. And that's fine. That's great. Public place, social gathering. Cool. I drop him off. He gives me a call at the end of the event. And he says that they want to go out to a restaurant after the event. And I'm like, okay, who's driving? Or how are you getting there? And he tells me that one of his friends is driving. Now, it's not like this in every state, but in the state that we live in, 16-year-olds can have their license. They can get their permit at 15 and they have their full-fledged license at 16. Other states, you need an adult learner's permit for X amount of time before you can get your license. Not in the state that we live in. So there are a lot of teenage drivers on the road. Now, what comes to my mind is how many people are going to be in this vehicle with my son. He gave me the names of the friend group. So there's about 4 or 5 people that's going to be in the car. As we know, that means that they're going to be talking. There's going to be some texting. There might be music playing. And all of that equals to distractions. So I have to make a decision. Am I going to allow my son to get in the car with his friend and go to this restaurant? That was a very tough decision for me to make, and I allowed him to go. My son is very trustworthy, and he knows that we are just a phone call away, and we maintain this open line of communication. I don't always say yes, but these are new times and this is a new season. So I am learning on the job once again. Now, with that being said, for my younger children, the issues and struggles that I'm facing is a little bit different. For my 5-year-old, she wants to watch different cartoons, and I'm realizing as an adult, some of the cartoons that I watched when I was younger, they had jokes for adults that I didn't catch as a kid. So when I watch it back, I'm like, well, that's a little inappropriate. Why would they even put that in this show? And now today, there are so many hidden agendas and doctrines that they are putting in these cartoons and movies and video games. And I really want to be careful about what I'm exposing my child and what's being stored into her subconscious mind. So when she wants to watch, I don't know, things that consist of magic or unicorns and vampires, I know that it is fake, but I make sure that my child knows that it's fake and that it isn't real. But sometimes there are certain shows that I say no about. And I watch my daughter's shoulders drop and I just see her deflate. I see her head drop and I see that she's sad, and it breaks me up. But I love her. I love her so much that I have to say no because I have to protect her. I love when my daughter's face lights up. I love her face when I say yes. But I have to know that there's a balance and I have to create this structure. Now, that is very difficult, especially when I'm trying to create a structure for myself. I think that a lot of adults and a lot of parents, a lot of people that have grown up depending or that were super dependent on their mothers and fathers, that they have a difficult time creating structure in their own lives, and it is difficult for them to create structure in their child's life, and it's much easier to let them have their way. So as you are going through this journey, be encouraged that you have every right to say no. One thing that I talked about a little while ago is this old mentality versus this mentality that we have today. And I mentioned how I'm glad that we moved away from some of these old mentalities. One of those old mentalities that I'm glad we moved away from is the thought of, or it's a saying that what happens in the house stays in the house. Yes, there is a certain level of privacy that your child should maintain to protect you in the household. But there's also a toxicity that is attached to this mentality. You having this mentality of what happens in the house stays in the house does not give you free reign to abuse your child, to abuse alcohol in front of your child, or abuse drugs in front of your child, or anything of that nature. Your child should be able to talk about this with somebody. That somebody could be an aunt. In our Spanish culture, we call it titi. And if it's not their titi or their tío, then maybe it can be their grandparents, their abuelo or abuelita. But they should have some adult figure that they can talk to, because it's hard for the child's brain to process what's going on. And if they talk to another adult, then that other adult can speak to you and get you the help that you need so that you can stop these unhealthy practices in front of your child, because all of these traumas your child will carry with them throughout their lives. Another mentality that I'm so glad that we moved away from is that kids are meant to be heard and not seen, or speak when spoken to. I read this book once. Well, I read more than once, but I read this book about sociology, and it featured this other book from this man named Richard Nisbett. And the title of the book is Intelligence and How Do We Get It? In this book, it talked about children that grow up in a working class house versus a child that grows up in an impoverished house, and the difference in how much they're exposed to. Children that grow up in an impoverished house, they are exposed to about 1,500 to 2,000 words a day. Whereas children that grow up in a working class house, they're exposed to about 3,000 words to 5,000 words a day. This man did this study, and how he came about this study was through IQ tests and state tests. By the age of 5, these children, the child that's raised in a impoverished household, they've heard about 2 million words. Whereas the child that grows up in a working class household, they hear about 5 million words. So where that led me is to think about why. Why is there such a difference in how many words these children are exposed to? And I thought back to my mother and how she was a young mother working. At one time, she was working 2 different jobs in 2 different towns and relying on public transportation to get there while raising my brother and I. And half the time that she was trying to put food on the table, or that she was putting food on the table, I'm sure after an 8-hour shift, a 12-hour shift, a 16-hour shift, she was drained and she's running on fumes. And here comes her child asking her, "What's for dinner?" And one of the responses that I despised as a child was, I would ask her, "What's for dinner?" And she would say, "Food." And I would say, "What kind of food?" And she would say, "The kind you eat." Now, although I didn't understand how she was operating from a place of survival. She was probably trying to figure out what she was going to put on the table, so she didn't have an answer for me. Where the children that are growing up in a non-impoverished household, now for the people that don't know, in America, the poverty line, if your annual salary is under $32,000 a year, you're considered poor. So, or you live in a low income community, or other words known as a ghetto. Now, for other people that don't know, ghetto is not just for Black or African Americans or Latinos and Spanish people. The ghettos were originally occupied by Irish people and Italian people and some Jewish people. Now, they are predominantly occupied by Blacks and Spanish people. But for people that don't live in these in an impoverished household, they have options. So when their child asks them what's for dinner, they give them different options, like, do you want burgers tonight, or do you want ribs tonight? That alone is giving that child different set of skills. They're giving them problem solving skills. They're giving them the option to make a choice for the family. And this will all be carried with them into their parenting approach, because they'll be able to give their child that same dialogue. Whereas a person who is constantly in that rat race and constantly just trying to figure it out, they are going to have a hard time having that dialogue. So please be encouraged to speak with your child. Have that open dialogue with your child. Even if you are struggling to figure out what's for dinner, give them the option, because that will help them in the long run. You are equipping them with tools on their tool belt that they'll be able to carry throughout life, and eventually they'll be able to use it. But last thing that I want to touch base on is co-parenting. My wife and I, we are a blended family. So I have my daughter that she is a stepmom to. That is our oldest daughter, who is 11 years old. And she has her son, who I am a stepfather to. And I've been in all roles around this step parent or stepchild, which I really don't like that word. And I wish that we can find another terminology for this title, because I'm dad and my wife is mom, and that's it. So my oldest daughter, she spends most of the year with her mother and her mother's fiance. So that's her stepdad. And myself, I've had a stepfather, and I've had my real father, my biological father, not real, but biological. There's a difference, because one is not a fake father or a fake mother. They are a second mom or a second dad, and that's how they should be treated. And that's the kind of respect that should be given. So I've experienced all aspects of this, of having a stepdad, being a stepdad, and my child having a stepdad. So with that being said, I think what I want people to know that is a extremely unhealthy practice is, if your child has a stepdad or if your child has a stepmom, don't tell your child not to listen to that person. Don't tell that child that they're not their parent, because again, it takes a village, and all you're doing is dividing that village, and all you're doing is putting more challenges on your child's biological parent that is in that household, because now they have to fight down this wall of distrust that you have created in your child. I say that because that's what was being said to me. That's what was being taught to me, was that I was the man of the house and I didn't have to listen to my stepdad, and he was just there. And that wasn't true. And my stepdad taught me a lot. He taught me how to play basketball. He brought me to my baseball games. He did all the things that a parent does for their child, and he loved me as such. And so does my daughter's stepfather. I had to learn this the hard way. And how I had to learn it was, one day I had called my daughter and I had bought her her first bike. It was a Huffy. And back in the day when I was a kid, Huffy, if you had a Huffy, you were that person. you were definitely lit, as they say. So with that being said, I called my daughter and I asked her, "Hey, are you riding the bike that dad got you?" And she said, "Yes." Said his name. "Yes, he taught me how to ride the bike." And at first, that was a blow. And I was heartbroken. But then I had to think, what came to mind was, is my daughter going to remember that dad bought me my first bike, or is she going to remember he taught me how to ride my first bike? She remembers both. And he played just as an important role that I played in her life, and is playing that role, as am I. So don't sit there and divide your child. Encourage your child to embrace this person. If they are a good parent, embrace that person, because co-parenting is difficult as is. and you don't want to create any extra challenges that is just completely unnecessary. I hope that we covered some very important stuff today. I know that it was a little uncomfortable. I know at times I needed to be transparent and I felt a little vulnerable, but I hope that you've seen that. I hope that you guys were edified in some way, shape, and form. I hope that you are educated. And if you have any advice for me, then please comment below. And I hope that you guys continue to subscribe to Growth and Development. I hope that you are around for our episode number 2, because that topic is going to be even more intense. Everyone, may God bless you and may you have a great day. Like, comment, subscribe, and share.